For the next few moments, we're going to listen to different professional players in these fields who are actually on the ground interacting with the day-to-day happenings of the needs of energy and power on the continent. And so I'd like to invite the next four gentlemen on stage. Round of applause, please, as they come. Encourage them, please. Thank you. And before I take my seat, I'd like to very quickly introduce them so that you know by what authority they speak the things they're about to. First, I'd like to introduce James Stewart on my far left. James Stewart is the Global Head of Infrastructure at KPMG UK. Next to James is Alistair Herbertson, who's the Director at Investec Asset Management, South Africa. We also have Mr. Lazarus Agbazo, who's the Chief Executive Officer, Energy Connections Business at GE Sub-Saharan Africa. Last but certainly not least, Andrew Hakovitz, who's the Coordinator for Power Africa USA. Thank you very much. So gentlemen, I mean, we've followed through the commitments made by the Minister, by ESCOM, and by the Ambassador, and it all points to everybody is in this concerted effort of taking Africa to the next level. And there was such a beautiful stage that had been set through a lot of conversations, but probably the latest one had been the World Economic Forum, where everybody is talking about the fact that we are indeed getting into the fourth industrial revolution, that Africa has to be part of this. And the question is, how then do we power this next move? How do we move into that space? I'd like to start with Andrew as an outside looking in perspective. When you talk about powering Africa into the next stage that we are to play, what do you see when outside looking in?
Sure. In fact, I think that everyone, we had everyone look to your left and to your right and introduce yourself to one another. But I think what I realize, having been working on Power Africa for 4 years now, some of the observations, some of the things that we've learned is that it's the people in this room who are the ones that are going to make sure that Africa moves forward into the future, has adequate power to move forward. I was here 2 years ago and I said during the same session, if you're not passionate about bringing power to people on the continent, you should quit your job. You should move on. Because what we've seen with Power Africa, this was launched almost 4 years ago, and we have the goal of adding 30,000 megawatts and 60 million connections on the continent. But we're really, really digging into the deal flow itself, and we thought that what we needed to do was make sure that deals move across the finish line, and we have teams. We have over 50 advisors in 14 countries who are working in distribution companies, working with transmission companies, in the power generation companies. But the deal flow is there. The deal flow is there. The money, and everyone take note of this, the money, it may not be there, but it's available and it wants to be here. So we have the Power Africa tracking tool, and it's publicly available. There's an Apple, if you have an iPhone, you can download it. I was looking at it this morning. Publicly, we're tracking close to 400 power generation projects. And my private one that I've got, because we haven't put everything out publicly, about 700, over 70,000 megawatts of deals. The problem is that we see is it's the predictability. It's an investor knowing that they're going to go into a country and that their money is going to be safe and that the rules of the game won't change midway through the cycle. That's what our greatest learning has been. It's been that making sure that you have a predictable investment climate. And that runs everything from the currency and how the currency is managed in a country.
Right.
We saw last year very few power projects reach financial close, and it wasn't because the deals weren't there. It was that if you look at a country like Nigeria, no investor was going to go ahead and invest in Nigeria at that particular time and reach financial close without knowing what was going to happen to the Naira. So it's how everyone is managing their own system and creating a predictable environment, not changing the rules of the game. But the deals are there. The money wants to be there. It's just making sure that you've got a good place where investors want to come. And I've said this repeatedly, Africa, it comprises more than 50 countries. Right. That means 50 different markets. Some countries are getting it and others aren't. So do you want to be the country where people are investing or the country where people are not investing because the deals are there?
Right. Let me just bring in James. James, kindly address yourself to the bankability of these deals, because Andrew says the deals are there, the money wants to come here, but how bankable are our projects?
Well, but I think banks are very simple people. They just require strong cash flows to finance projects. I mean, to me, I think the big change is going to come from moving from corporately raised debt, moving away from project finance debt, and perhaps moving into consumer finance. If you look at what technology is going to do to this market, I mean, I think new technology is going to fill a lot of this gap, and that new technology will be solar and storage. And I think the way we finance solar and storage is going to be on a microgrid or even on a personal household basis. As I say, that will move us to consumer finance type products. And that, I think, will open up a much bigger market. And I think the other side of this will be that this technology will perhaps make the service more affordable. I mean, you think about the telephone was a highly expensive instrument, very expensive to install with fixed line telephony. Along comes the mobile phone, telephony becomes affordable, and the consumer finance takes off the back of that.
Right. And Lazarus, just bringing you in, you've obviously had quite significant success operating in West Africa. We've talked about, yes, these deals are there, yes, Africa needs this part to tip over, but as somebody who's worked on the ground and just seeing this happen, what are the biggest needs, even as we address ourselves to, are we ready to take it to the next level?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I tell you, one of the things that I always remember is a statement made by, I believe, the former president of Nigeria with respect to power. He said, there's no power, there's no future, right? Not for the country and not for the leadership either. And obviously, that is being demonstrated. I mean, most elections in Africa today are clearly a referendum on the availability of power. I can tell you, the business that I run, Energy Connections, most people are familiar with the generation businesses. But Energy Connection tries to solve four main problems to get to the issue about the sustainability of industrial revolution. Mm-hmm. And I think the Deputy Minister spoke a little bit about the first one, which is access. This is a huge problem. I mean, we've got about over 60% of the population in the region. This translates to about 600 million people that don't really have access. The data can go here and there, but it's a significant problem. So our focus is how do we extend that access of the grid? Because, as the minister said, everything hangs on the grid. It really does. Number two, for people that have access, the reliability of that power is not even assured.
Right.
We estimate that there's about 20 to 25% of the power that actually gets generated, gets translated to the grid, and never gets to the consumer. So how do we solve for that? I mean, that's a big problem, and it's all about investing in the technology, in the human capital, in the operations and maintenance capability of all of the utilities. Number four, I think James began to kind of allude to it. The demand for power is all going to continue to increase. Right. But even more importantly, the sources of power, the various sources, the diversification around that. So renewables is a big deal. We're seeing it in East Africa. It's coming to West Africa as well. But to integrate all of that power into the conventional grid is not such a straightforward answer. So that is going to throw a whole new dimension to the challenges that utility leaders such as we have in this room are going to have to deal with, right? And the fourth one is what we just left off, which is the bankability and therefore the financeability or investability of these projects. I agree totally with Andrew, with Andy, and with Jack. Money wants to be here. But what we've found is that the money is not going to come here until we actually get projects that are truly well developed. And so a company like GE decided that we are not going to wait any longer. We cannot continue to wait for other people to structure the projects, define the projects, and then put an RFQ out there. So we basically have invested in the capacity to develop projects in-house. We call it demand creation. We know the need is there, but there are no projects. So we have to go and create those projects and basically work with entities such as Andrew and Investec and of course KPMG as well, and a lot of people in the room as well. So I think those four problems are significant. I think we're all going to be working for the rest of our lives, trying to solve this, and that's encouraging, but that's also tells you the significance of what our mission is. For this industry, and I just get excited about seeing a room like this with with really senior people from all over the continent really focused on this issue. So I'm really excited to be here.
Fantastic. Alistair, in your opening remarks, I'd like you to answer the direct question. Where's the money? Everybody's saying the money wants to be here. You deal with investors, you advise them. What are the trends you're seeing as far as where the money is and how is this likely to change going forward?
I think I definitely need to reiterate that statement that there's a very real appetite in the world for investment in African infrastructure. So whether that's from the Asian, from the East, from America, from Europe, we continuously are receiving phone calls asking us whether we could structure a product that would bring availability of the African infrastructure opportunity to our investors. And we must remember that our investors ultimately, if you go through the chain, are individuals who have saved and worked exceptionally hard and brought their life savings to a firm to manage. And as a custodian of that person's money, and those people will be workers and laborers and lower income as well as wealthier individuals. So it's always important to remember who the individual is at the end, whose money they've entrusted to us to invest and who we have trusted in the project to invest it into. And I think this goes to Andy's point, is that what we look for is certainty. We're never going to find a perfect solution. We're never going to find a perfect regulatory system. But certainty and the ability to understand the rules of the game is what really gives us the confidence to take the money from these investors who we have had to say no to for many years and who we have had to hold them back and say, it's not quite ready. We can't promise you the type of investment returns or the type of certainty that you require at this time. So we do continuously see appetite across the board and across the globe for Africa. This is one of the key growth theses of the world in Africa.
James, you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the money comes, or the financing comes from certainly governments, it certainly comes from the private sector, it certainly comes from multilaterals. And multilaterals, we're seeing a big change in their role, in the sense they're no longer looking to lend off their balance sheets in a wholesale manner, but looking to use their balance sheets to take certain risks and deal and leverage in private sector money, which I think is a real term for the better. But I think the fourth dimension, which I don't think we talk about at all, is the aid and development agencies. And with Andrew here, I mean, it's great because that is another massive part of this, given that in many parts of the world, and indeed Africa, the levels of tariff or the payments by the user varies enormously, and therefore the level of subsidy and the cost of delivering the service to the consumer is changing. And so I hope that we do make this a better connection between the aid and development agencies and those other three stakeholders.
And probably, Andrew, as you come in, I mean, do we have the architecture to allow this relationship that you talk about for players like aid agencies to play a more active role in financing this?
So let's go back to, so yes, we do. In fact, one of the things that Power Africa has done is we now have over 150 public and private partners, including 12 bilateral, multilateral agencies, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, private companies, the governments of Norway, Sweden, Canada, France, the UK, the EU. We're all working together.
Right.
And we're funding one another's programs. We're all rowing in the same direction. We know what the problems are. What Power Africa does, and again, you can go online, we have a toolbox that you can look at, and it has over 160 tools from all of these different partners and agencies, everything from financing to legal assistance, technical assistance, political assistance, whatever it's going to be. It's a one-stop shop. No one's ever done that before. But we need the utilities and the governments to do their part as well. The example I like to give is, I was in one country and there were 2 mini hydro projects that were stuck. They were about 1 or 2 megawatts each. And someone in the ministry decided to pull the plug on the basically say the PPA had expired, and they wanted to renegotiate the deal now. They wanted to move forward with the deal, but they said, your PPA has expired, and now let's renegotiate. I had to explain to the ministry there, I said, look, this may be 2 megawatts total. It's not going to bankrupt your country if the tariff's a little bit higher than it should be. But what will happen is, if you don't move forward on this deal and you don't create a predictable investment climate, everyone comes to these conferences like we are right now. We just heard someone list the 5 countries that are best places to invest. I don't care if it's 2 megawatts or 500 megawatts, everyone's going to be talking about what just happened in your country. Get the deal across the finish line, show that the deal can move forward. And just like we see what happens in Kenya, where everybody wants to invest in Kenya, even though that market's saturated because it's a predictable investment climate, but the cost of capital comes down when there's more competition, and it ultimately benefits the consumer, the government, and everyone. So just get deals across the finish line. It doesn't have to be the perfect deal. It's like someone who graduates business school and suddenly thinks they know everything and wants to run their business and do everything exactly the way. You just need to get things done. Just get them done.
Right, right. Lazarus, just to bring you in, what do you see as this role that Andrew talks about where utilities can play in building this relationship? What is their active role?
Well, I tell you, I think Andrew is right. I mean, getting a project, I mean, these projects are complex, whether it's 1 megawatt or 500 megawatts. And it has so many milestones along the way. I think where I'll probably differ a little bit is that the business model is not quite there yet, right? I mean, we as a company, we're basically a manufacturer, right? And we're interested in selling turbines or grid solutions or substations or circuit breakers and all of those things that allow the connectivity. But we can't keep waiting, you know, for the money to come from somewhere else, right? So the idea of really activating projects, which means putting the capacity in place and really develop the projects from concept to a plan that is implementable, that takes time.
Sorry to jump in,
And it
but
takes money.
what would it take to do
GDP is
that?
getting lost when deals are stalled. I mean, if you have to think big picture in your country. Is it worth it to take 2 years to negotiate this 500 megawatt deal, or use emergency power for
There you go.
another year, or not have any power at all?
Right,
So the key, therefore, is everybody should really put more skin in the game,
right.
right? We're doing that. We're investing in the development phase. We're developing.
Do utilities, sorry to jump in again,
Yeah.
do utilities have enough incentive to put more skin in the game?
Absolutely. I mean, the demand is there. I mean, perhaps, you know, the tariffs, you know, that's a big debate. You know, is it enough? Isn't it enough? Whatever. You know, I mean, I think, you know, there is enough demand to say that there's a business there that you can build a business model around that. Yeah.
Right. Alistair, how do you make the deal sweeter because to me it seems like the government is willing, aid agencies are willing, the utilities, there's a lot more that still needs to be done from that point of view. How do you make the deal sweeter for them?
I think I mean, I hate to reiterate a point that I've already reiterated, is it's certainty and predictability of transactions makes the process smoother and more efficient.
Right.
We were considering a transaction recently, which is a small transaction. It's in a very challenging territory, and it's a small transaction, and yet through the process of revisiting, revising, trying to accommodate various lenders' positions, sponsors' positions, we're finding that the development costs as a percentage of the construction, of the percentage of the levelized cost of electricity ultimately is skyrocketing. Right. And what we really need to do, and I think this is where Power Africa has been invaluable in the continent, has been to facilitate the process of making that a smoother and more efficient evolution of a concept through to operation. I think the other point I just want to come back to is, if we look at the capital requirements of the African infrastructure going forward, whether you take a McKinsey number or a World Bank number, it's in the trillions.
Right.
This is a number that's even beyond the aid agencies. It's beyond the government agencies. This is a number that can only be financed through growth. And we've got to look at that. And when I say growth, I mean ultimately through commercial investors. So the World Bank and the British government through the Department for International Development are focusing on billions to trillions. How do we mobilize the billions of dollars that's being invested at the moment and convert that into trillions? And this really does come to having to work in partnership between the private sector, private capital, and the government, the aid agencies, so both the home government and the development finance.
Right. So the architecture is there. It doesn't need to be perfect. We just need to get it working, right? James, very quickly before you
I just want to I want to repeat this point because I think we need to realize the size of the prize. The prize is not building a new power station or a new grid. It is providing electricity to people and therefore stimulating the economy. And we just need to decomplicate these deals, if that's a word. I mean, to me, we've now got risk mitigation measures which are available to governments, multilaterals, aid agencies, and we need to just make these deals simpler, get them done quicker, because the value, as Andrew said, of getting a deal done in a country is you start to build a track record, and then the next deal is easier, and the next deal is easier after that. So I just see so much complexity, and not just in Africa, right around the world, and a reluctance on behalf of governments to take a little bit more risk in these early deals. I think someone mentioned currency risk earlier. I mean, currency is the risk that bedevils, in my view, many, many deals, and wherever I go, there is a reluctance to hedge that risk. And currency rates have been unbelievably volatile in the last 2 years, and the private sector does not like that risk, and it needs to be taken out of a deal.
And the issue is not necessarily the rate, it's the issue is not necessarily the rate, it's how it's managed.
Yeah.
Because you can price the currency into any deal, but if it's not being managed the way in accordance with international norms, then nobody's going to go in. But I do want to make a point that there are several missing pieces, which is why this conference is so critical. One is the power trade. We've seen recently, Power Africa has these ambitious megawatt goals. We're now looking at countries like Ghana, which based on the deal flow that it has, it expects that its supply would exceed its demand.
Right.
Rwanda, the same, expects that its supply will exceed its demand. South Africa right now, I understand, has excess demand. Nigeria's got 12,000 megawatts of generation capacity, but is only able to actually distribute 4,000 megawatts. But making sure, there's no question that there's a power deficit on the continent, and the power pools are going to be critical, and making sure that there's collaboration among the countries. And then the other piece is the distribution. We went into Nigeria, and it's such an important economy, and we work very closely with GE, and we realized there were about 9 different pieces that need to be fixed there. But one where we saw we could actually make progress was in the distribution companies. We helped some of the distribution companies turn around. We had one reduce its losses from 54% to 40% in just 6 months. That's critical, because now it means people are actually, the distribution companies have money to pay others as well, and you can get more people connected. We also realized that we don't know how many people were connected to the grid in Nigeria. It's a country of 180, 190 million people. They count 6 million people who have grid connections. Well, we know more people are connected to the grid because a lot of people are stealing it, but we have to figure out how do you solve that problem? And the technologies of smart metering. We've got a pilot project that the U.S. Trade and Development Agency did with a company called Spark Meter, where they're bringing in thousands of smart meters that are highly efficient, great technology, but inexpensive. And figuring out how to turn around the distribution companies, so that, because that's the critical part of the value chain.
Right. I'd like us to shift gears, but before we do that, you brought in a good point. I mean, there's been a lot of conversation, even in Nairobi, about overcapacity and the fact that, yes, we've produced, but who is using it? And governments will come and say, well, we're thinking of exporting it, but we don't know to who exactly. Probably, Lazarus, very quickly, before we shift gears to another issue, how do you address overcapacity? Because on one point, there is an energy deficit on the continent, but we have success stories, but we just don't know how to do with that.
Yeah, I think the misnomer here is available. There's installed capacity.
Right.
And then what's available is significantly less than what is required. I mean, even in this country, we were told, you got manufacturers that are fleeing because they don't have enough reliable power. But this is the biggest source of power, or with installed capacity here. We have the same situation in every country. I mean, the manufacturing, sector there has gone down because they're not getting enough power. But in the meantime, you have the governments quoting all these huge amounts of installed base.
Right.
But what is available, is significantly less than what is required, and the gap is what I talked about at the beginning, which is the connectivity of this power. It's not there. Until we kind of make a big shift from generation focus into investing in the grid, the sustainability of that grid, the reach of that grid to the communities where we have economic activities, we're going to be having this debate.
Right.
But I think it's a wrong debate to say that there's enough power and people are not consuming. There is not enough available power.
Available power.
Yeah.
Yes, Alistair, very quickly.
A very quick additional comment is that a deficit or a surplus of power is not a state, it's a time. So we will be in deficit, and then we'll be in surplus, and then we'll be in deficit. And the objective of any good utility is to minimize the amount of time that you're sitting in one of those two extremes. And I think we look at the power need of Africa, just a simple forecast, we can see that it's a deficit.
Right.
But we do need industry to grow. And we need industry to grow. It doesn't jump from today to tomorrow levels. It needs to grow. So we need to twin the two together. Bring the power, let the industry grow. Bring more power, let the industry grow. And that's really how Africa is going to evolve, is by industrialization, not by consumption.
Right.
We've got to grow the industrialization
Right.
and make those opportunities.
So, gentlemen, we've just looked at the deal flow as one of the the trends that we need to be aware of, even as we answer the question of powering Africa. The next trend that I think is important to look at is the global climate changes that we do experience. There's been a lot of laws that have been put in place. There's been a lot of conversations. But is Africa part of this? And can Africa find its piece of the puzzle in the wake of all this? Lazarus, I see you nodding your head. Would you like to just take the first? What is Africa's role in all this?
Well, I think we're definitely affected. I mean, we have countries where you've got significant droughts. I mean, a number of countries today, I think the installed base in Africa, outside of South Africa, is probably mostly hydro. And with the increased incidence of hydro, the availability and the sustainability of power generated from hydro is low. So, definitely we have to think about how do we diversify our sources of power. Unfortunately, the technologies are out there. But we are not insulated, and the sooner we kind of address this head on in terms of the energy mix in our install base, I mean, the better we are.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, Andrew. Okay, anyway. Let's go, James, first.
I think you've got to feel sorry for developing economies, because, I mean, the developed economies have basically gone through their industrial revolutions using fossil fuels. And countries like Africa or India or Asia, ASEAN, Southeast Asia, they have still have lots of fossil fuel reserves, and that is still cheaper than the renewable energy. I think the big issue for me is, will the price of this new technology, this renewable technology, solar and storage, wind, and maybe other forms of generation, will it come down sufficiently to be first of all at parity with conventional power, and then hopefully get it even cheaper? And I think that's when we'll see the revolution, because then the economics of it all become much easier.
Mm-hmm.
Power Africa, I mean, we take an all-of-the-above technology approach. We always have, because we care about two things: megawatts and connections. And if you look at the 62 projects that have reached financial close since Power Africa was launched, by megawatts, about 3/4 of those are gas projects. Mm-hmm. By number of projects, about 3/4 of renewables. But the countries, whether it's climate impacts or seasonal impacts, you have to have that diverse mix of energy.
All right. And are investors willing to listen to this whole diversification question when you go into that, or are we just going to go for the project that is most profitable?
I think the key here is to really appreciate that we have as a globe have learned our lessons. We have made the mistakes. The Newcastle coal age and the smog and the pollution and what we're seeing in Beijing now, those are mistakes that have been made, which we should learn from. And we should never stand there and say, well, we have got to develop, so we're going to make these same mistakes. I think we need to learn from other countries' previous mistakes. And we also have an amazing, I mean, the efficiency of generating electricity today makes the price of electricity a lot cheaper than it was during the Industrial Revolution. Ultimately, the investor has the right to decide how they would like to see their money invested. And it doesn't matter what my belief is in thermal technology or dirty technology, or about babies on incubators not having electricity, which is a critical problem we have. Ultimately, there will be an investor who has decided that they don't wish to support fossil fuels, and we have to respect that, because ultimately it's their money.
Right.
And this is where Africa needs to become the owner of its own destiny. We need to build the local savings pools, because the currency convertibility problem that was mentioned disappears. Sure, we'll see foreign investors wanting to come in, but this is how we need to evolve. We need to be masters of our own destiny, develop our own savings pools, and then grow. And I think, the lessons we've learned and the benefits we've gained from other continents' mistakes should not be undervalued and should be appreciated, even if it comes with constraints.
Right. Gentlemen, let's shift gears again. The whole industrial revolution has been attributed to the fourth one, that is, has been attributed to the whole digital divide and the fact that we are all going digital. There's been questions about, are we ready for that? And that's an ongoing debate. But how does going digital, in practical sense, improve efficiency? And what are the practical ways that we can start this off, Lazarus?
Yeah. So you think about the technology behind power generation. I think there's a data out there that says a turbine is able to churn about 2 terabytes of data per day.
Right.
That is a huge amount of useful data that can be leveraged to provide insights in terms of how do you make the turbine work better. Now, we also know that 75% of the time when a turbine breaks down, these are usually predictable events.
Right.
So the idea of sort of digitizing or leveraging the data that comes from physical assets, and providing the right sort of analytics to anticipate when downtimes are going to happen, because every time a power plant goes down, that's money that you're kind of burning away, right? So I think the time is, even for the install base that we have, we can certainly leverage that install base by using technologies or softwares around asset optimization, software, where you kind of take this data, analyze them, put them into some sort of algorithm that allows you to have better, improved maintenance and management of your assets. That translates into huge amounts of savings in terms of lost time, in terms of service time. And I think the key is that if you go to any one of our power plants in this room here,
right,
there's enough of an install base to actually put some of this. We call this thing sort of predictive analytics. That's basically it's as simple as taking the physical assets, leveraging the data that comes out of that in order for your operating team to have a better assessment, better knowledge, better forecast as to when things are going to go down, and you can kind of have a more managed approach to how you operate your plant and therefore deliver the service to your customers. It's as simple as that.
Are we already using analytics, James?
Well, my personal bet for the technology company of the future is the Uber equivalent in energy, which is the company that's going to sit between all these multiple sources of generation and the consumer, and there will be some unbelievably clever app and algorithm that will be able to price electricity efficiently for the consumer. So that's I think anyone who can get into that company early. But I think just one slight left. We've got a lot of people here who are interested in water, to me, technology in the water industry, I think the biggest thing that we can do is find a way to manage whole life costs of the assets in the water industry. And undoubtedly, technology with remote sensors, better data management, is going to improve the performance of those assets. I think in someone told me yesterday in South Africa the leaks are well over 40%, which if you can solve that problem, then you don't have to start building new infrastructure. That you can increase the capacity of your existing infrastructure substantially.
And as Andrew comes in, Andrew, we talk about Smart Africa as the next stop for us. And the fact that there's a lot of technology right now with us, but are we using it? And what are the basic ways we can start off? Because it's easy to talk about data analytics
we're
here,
using
but
it,
is it
and
practical?
it's awesome, the technology that's being used in Africa right now. And we've been talking mostly about the big grid projects, but I just jotted down 5 technologies. One that I already mentioned, smart meters, which will help deliver power to people. Because one of the reasons people don't want to pay for power, you can say they're stealing it, but sometimes people just don't want to pay their bill because they feel like they're being overcharged. Smart meters solves that. So once you have high quality, low cost smart meters, that can make a big difference. And once utilities know how to use them well. The other thing that we're seeing is we even talked about microgrids, and you've got microgrids right now that are using smart controllers to transmit information to cloud-based applications, and so
Right.
you can see how but the microgrid industry is still very new. What we see that isn't new, and which Africa is really it's the model for the world, is the use of solar home systems, where people are doing pay-as-you-go. You've got SIM cards installed in the solar home system, so the providers can see what the usage is like. But even more importantly, this is what I love most about the solar home systems, is that it's led to a real revolution in the creation of super efficient appliances, where you've got a person with an 80-watt panel who's powering a 23 or a 30, a 30-inch, I say inches, sorry for being the American, television. Electric razors. I've seen companies like Mobisol who have people using welding equipment that are being run by the solar panel. And it's people who are demanding less power, and it's they're able to live the life that's equivalent to being on the grid, and they're choosing to go off grid. And then the last critical piece of technology, which I think everyone here agrees on, is battery storage.
Right.
And we see all the strides that Tesla and Solar City are making, and others, but really having Fluidic is a company out of the United States, which is doing about 100 microgrids with Caterpillar and others in Madagascar. So seeing what happens with that battery storage technology is going to be absolutely critical to help improve efficiencies and
Right.
also develop the microgrid and the off-grid
Right.
space.
Just a couple of examples.
And GE
to
too.
buttress, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
To buttress what Andy is saying, I mean, obviously the access problem is most acute in rural areas. Microgrid is a really perfect example of how we're working with certain rural electrification agencies. In Zambia, for example, we're discussing that. Even in Nigeria, where we have clusters of university campuses. This is a concept now that you can actually run these microgrids in parallel with the central grid. And you can do it in such a way that it actually allows for a much more efficient, gradual phasing of the cost as well.
Right.
Where you run these two things in parallel, but they can be connected as well. And I can tell you, I mean, this is the way to go as well,
Right.
because the big central generation, as I talked about, is going through a whole new revolution itself. That the configuration and the architecture of that is something that will be a combination of different many things. Yeah.
In
I
which,
would say
yeah,
the
sure.
600 million person deficit, energy deficit, is a 600 million person opportunity for technological advancement, and
Right.
we're seeing that. And the smaller companies doing it. And I'm waiting for GE to gobble up some of these companies at some point as well. And that you'll get economies of scale, which will really bring down prices.
In
Yeah.
which case, going forward, what do you see, and anyone can take this, what do you see as a big disruptor going forward in the marriage between utilities, whether we talk about power or water and tech for Africa?
I don't know. So,
I think one of the key areas that we have to be very sensitive to and very careful to manage is that Africa has a very young demographic. Some countries in Africa have 25% of their population under the age of 15. Most of these are rural children. And those rural children are going to come together into urban aggregations. I think what we really need to apply our minds to is how we facilitate that process of, one, educating those children, because without education, the knowledge-based economy is going to pass them by. The second is how to support them in an urbanization process, which could either lead to the multiplier effect we see in urban areas, or it could lead to slums and health issues. And I think this is where the combination of electricity and water really comes together in the urbanization thesis that Africa is going to endure for the next 20-odd years. I think that is I think your disruptor question
Right.
was more around what's going to disrupt the current
Yes.
status quo, but I think this could disrupt the application or the benefit that the fourth industrial
And obviously
revolution will bring
these
to us.
disrupts the investor flow as well.
And I think one of the real disruptors are the sort of online education portals. I think those will be able to bring knowledge and learning to people who are disconnected from education, disconnected from electricity currently, disconnected from society, and will be able to enable them to improve themselves and then to start contributing.
Andrew?
Yeah, so for me, the biggest disruptor to the model is these solar home system companies for a couple of reasons. One, traditionally, distribution companies didn't really see people in rural areas as being paying customers. So it doesn't make sense to extend the grid to those folks. But what you're seeing is if you take a 5-year-old boy somewhere right now who's growing up in a rural area with a solar home system, and each year, every few months, the technology gets better, the appliances become more and more efficient, they're going to opt out of using the grid at some point. And what the solar home system companies are doing through their mobile payment systems, they're showing that these folks are paying customers. They start off with a cell phone charger and a few light bulbs and then maybe a small television, but what these companies have said is people will move from the 19-inch TV to the 30-inch TV within a matter of months. So the demand is there. So you have the value of that data of all those payments. If I'm running a distribution company right now, I'm probably going to buy or partner with some of these solar home system companies so that I can understand the market, understand what the customer base is going to be. Right. I can also get a better sense as to who might be a good paying customer for the grid. But that 5-year-old boy who's using a solar home system now, if the grid doesn't get there 10 years from now, just imagine how good the technology is going to be. It's sort of like my son who, they don't, I mean, he skips over Facebook. He doesn't, nobody uses a landline anymore. They're just going to not even care about the grid. It's going to be like an old record to them.
Right. Interesting. James, very quickly.
Yeah, so I mean, to me, and certainly you're seeing this everywhere else in the world, the big utility companies are looking at their operational models and recognizing they're going to change completely over 10, 20 years. I think that the key question is how quickly will these disruptive technologies take hold and start to replace some conventional generation and transmission.
Right.
And that I think is going to be the critical business judgment over the next 10 years.
Right. And gentlemen, we just have under 6 minutes before we bring this to a landing. So I'd like to give each of us just 2 minutes or maybe a minute and a half to give you closing comments in regards to how then do we tie up our readiness for this fourth industrial revolution in regards to utilities that will be power and water. Let's start with James coming down.
Thank you. That's a nice fastball. So I think this, we're moving into a world of much more complexity and therefore the companies that are going to survive are going to be the agile ones. I mean, you're going to have to keep going with existing technology. You're going to have to embrace new technology. You're going to have to judge your investment right across the spectrum. And as I say, I think agility, flexibility, and change, the ability to change is going to be the key dynamic over the next 5-10 years.
Alistair?
I think we're on the edge of a phenomenal opportunity, and that opportunity will bring poverty to book, will be able to educate, grow the population, and I think it's genuinely going to take a concerted effort between the local savers, the private investors, the banks, the governments, the utilities, to really think about how they can, contribute to this and what it is that they wish to achieve through their contribution. Mm-hmm. And then for everyone to be honest about what it is that is important to the other person and accept that is one of the parts of partnerships, is understanding that other individuals and other entities have different objectives and accommodating those objectives in a deal that works. So I think for this to really move forward, we need to have more of that sort of coordinated or consolidated approach. And I think that just comes through these opportunities where we meet and discuss and get to understand one another better.
Right. Fantastic.
So I guess I'll leave you with a note of encouragement. I am very optimistic about the industry and about the region. The need is huge, okay? People are going to demand what we do. People are going to need it. Obviously, if you look at the landscape globally today, there's a big focus on localism, nationalism, economic nationalism, and protectionism, all of that. Okay? But I think this is a tremendous opportunity for African governments, African businesses to really kind of be more innovative and more creative in terms of how do they tap into the resources that are available. But we've got the market, and it's real, and people are going to need this thing. If we don't deliver it, somebody's going to find a way to do it. So my parting word of encouragement is for the governments that are in the room, I mean, you've got a tough task. We appreciate what you do, and we just continue to encourage movement in terms of the reforms that are necessary for players like Power Africa, GE, the investors to play. You've got a lot of the utility companies, the investors, the sponsors of these projects are in the room. We need that enabling environment in order for us to achieve what our communities and our populations really require. So on that note, again, thanks for all the work you're doing.
Thank you very much. And as Andrew, you take us home, you also do have an announcement from the
I do,
the power
and I just
program.
want to say I'm extremely encouraged. So let me say I'm extremely encouraged about what we're seeing. I think that where we are today compared to where we were 4 years ago, we've got all of the different traditional donors working together. We have African governments. The amount of information out there is tremendous right now. We get a monthly report from all of our teams in the field about what's happening, and I saw that 2 different partners went into a country and proposed solar deals on a sole source basis for under 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And I said, well, that's incredible, because this was 3 years ago. They would have gone in and they would have proposed 30 cents a kilowatt hour. And thanks to the IFC and World Bank Scaling Solar Program, which has really brought down the price. But I would also caution countries to not assume that that your country is the same as every other country. We saw 6 to 8 cent solar being offered in Zambia. That's very different than northern Nigeria. So you've got to realize that we're not always the prettiest person at the ball, and we need to figure out how do we get people to want to come and work here and show that, hey, even though I'm not the prettiest one, I'm a really good date. Let's move forward on this deal, and then maybe my reputation will get better, and more and more people will start asking me out. To that end, I mean, Power Africa has an incredible network, and I say it's not just the U.S. government, but USAID Southern Africa has just launched its Southern Africa Energy Program, which will be working in the Southern African countries, and it's going to be focusing on improving regulation. It's going to be doing capacity building, increasing access, and there's a one-pager available outside if anyone's interested. But really, if you ever feel like you're not getting a fair deal, reach out to Power Africa. We can connect you with any one of our advisors or any one of our partners. And the idea is just keep running as fast as you can. You're going to make some mistakes. You're going to. We all make mistakes. But you can't be nervous and scared. Otherwise, everyone's going to stay in the dark for another 3 generations. So let's just keep on moving. Right. We'll make the mistakes together.
Thank you very much. That's a good place to leave it. A round of applause to my panelists. Gentlemen, thank you for your submissions. And for the past hour, we've been trying to understand, are we ready for the 4th industrial revolution in regards to a power revolution? A few things that have come out very clearly is that the projects are there, the money is there, the money wants to be in this continent. So it's about creating a case for it. Also, we've seen adjustments that need to be made in order to align to the changes that we do see climatically and at a global level, and that is already happening. Also, the whole idea of a digital divide and the disruptive nature it is here with us. The onus is upon innovators and entrepreneurs and thinkers like yourselves in the room right now to try and figure out what is the winning combination that will take us to the next level. Gentlemen, I've been speaking to James Stewart, Global Head of Infrastructure at KPMG UK, Lazarus Agbazo, who's a CEO for Energy Connections Business, GE Sub-Saharan Africa, Alistair Hubbardson, Director at Investec Asset Management South Africa, and Andrew Hakovitz, who's a Coordinator for Power Africa USA. Give a round of applause to my panelists as they take their seats. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.